So if you hadn't heard, Google just came out with what is essentially a video game generator. It's actually crazy timing because I've been planning for a while now on making a video regarding generative AI in video games. And I just want to talk about my thoughts on the matter because I started out thinking about generative AI very optimistically. And between Google's video game generator and just my general experience using generative AI over the past, 2 years, I'd say, I'm not actually all that thrilled anymore. In fact, it's kind of scary the way things are going. So let me back up a bit and let's just go back and I'll tell the story of where things kind of started for me on this topic. For anybody who's been on this channel for a while, you'll know that I love talking about storytelling in video games, particularly RTSs. And if you're subscribed, well, that's likely why you're subscribed. I just love RTSs as a medium for telling stories, and I just think there's so much room for growth in that genre that's just not happening right now. And I've loved debating in the comments with you guys, particularly about the ethics of the culling. I've made quite a few videos on that, and I've had plenty of debates, probably too many debates. That's kind of why I've moved on from that, but it's a lot of fun. And a lot of these debates ended up involving hypothetical alternate scenarios. Many of these would be, comparing what we know happened in the storyline versus what may have happened had Arthas not participated in the culling. And then there was other scenarios in which we explored what would happen had, say, Uther and Jaina actually stayed and helped Arthas with the culling during these debates. What if Uther had stayed? And I actually made a video on this. I made a short and a longer form video on what if Uther had stayed. And that video led me to deciding to make a custom campaign. In fact, I'd actually spent a significant amount of time developing a custom campaign. And it took place in a timeline where Uther didn't abandon Arthas, like I was saying. And instead of Arthas, he went to Northrend. And the campaign was a lot of fun to make. I created this charismatic character called Aiden Greymark, a Knight of the Silver Hand, who ended up opposing Uther. And the reason why was, in this campaign, Uther, having betrayed his own sense of justice, purpose, and ethics, had lost the ability to use the light, which essentially had caused his army to lose faith in him. And throughout the missions, things just got kind of worse and worse and worse with the decision-making Uther had and the choices that he had. And Aiden, who had not participated in the culling, there was this big dynamic. I'm not going to get into that, especially since, that nothing ended up coming out of that campaign. But I was just fascinated with the way that particular story could develop. And unfortunately, I didn't have time or motivation to finish the campaign once I went back to school. But in the back of my mind, I thought, wouldn't it be neat to play through Warcraft 3 and have the choice at the culling to be able to persuade Uther to stay through dialogue options, and if you did, you'd get the alternate campaign I envisioned, otherwise it's the normal campaign. And then I thought, well, what if there was actually a whole RTS that was like that? A whole choose-your-own-adventure story where you don't just have a say in the way an objective is achieved, but actually choosing what objectives to have agency within the grand narrative and strategic choices of your faction. And thus spawned the idea for a narrative-based RTS. The one that I'm working on in my head right now is inspired by the Star Trek Armada series. That could change over time, but that's where I'm at right now. Now, the thing is, though, is that this is an incredibly ambitious idea, for anybody, let alone a solo indie game dev who's going to school. And that's where AI kind of comes in. Because with the advent of generative AI, an idea like this to be taken on seems a lot more feasible without having the resources of a AAA studio, or any studio for that matter, since I am working alone. I could draw some terrible pictures, get AI to improve them. use those images as references and then create 3D models in Blender. I could get ChatGPT to help me write stories and dialogue, to plan out all the elaborate ways the story could play out, and take into consideration the ramifications certain decisions would have. I could do all of the voice acting myself and use 11 Labs as a voice changer. When I came up with this idea, I was pretty pro AI. I saw AI art learning as essentially no different than the way humans learn to make art now. I saw people grumbling about generative AI as essentially no different than some 19th century person complaining about the automobile industry and what are people going to do when factories take away all the farming jobs. But after having used a lot of this generative AI technology, my opinions have been changing. Most recently, I decided to remake a cartoon I wrote in grade 8 using Google VO3. The comic and scene centers around an anthropomorphic cactus smoking a cigar during basic training. VO3 had no problem rendering the drill sergeant and his voice, which was actually pretty consistent amongst scenes and prompts. But it did have a hard time rendering my cactus character. It was clear to me that I was asking for something creative the AI was struggling to portray because it mustn't have had the data to draw from. The opposite was the case with the drill sergeant, who seemed the same every time I prompted for a shot from a close-up perspective. You can see a reflection of a camera and a camera operator in his sunglasses. This goes without saying why this is the case, but I couldn't prompt this away. And the thing is that this was actually the moment where things really started to change for me, in my view. Because who was this person in the reflection of this guy's glasses, or amalgamation of people? Because if you think about it, and if we go in good faith and say Google got all its training data legally and ethically, let's say that every actor that is in a video that they use for training has consented to be used for AI training. Does that count for the camera operators? Because they're not the ones being filmed, they're the ones doing the filming, yet they are in one of the videos, or they're in the training data because of a reflection being a byproduct of the glasses being reflective. And the thing that was also crazy about this, about why it's such a big deal for me, was because it was fourth wall breaking. And it was fourth wall breaking in the most bizarre way, because it was the camera in the reflection that was doing the wall breaking, but the camera wasn't actually there. It didn't exist in the scene. It didn't exist in the prompt. It wasn't taking the video. It wasn't recording the video because it wasn't a video that was recorded. It was rendered. This camera is nothing but an artifact of training data that can't be gotten rid of, at least right now. And to go back about the ethics, that's where I kind of looked into things a little bit more. And it turns out, no, the way these companies are going about getting training data isn't necessarily ethical. In fact, sometimes it's very, very unethical, and they're getting away with it. And that's a whole other rabbit hole that I could go on about, but I'm going to keep on track as best I can because this is already all over the place. So anyway, I recreate my comic. I kind of have this moment where the sunglasses kind of make me kind of assess my thoughts over the consent portion of AI. Between that and, what is commonly drawn from, this drill sergeant character, I wouldn't be surprised to see him in many other AI videos that have a similar prompt. I'll probably see him in other people's videos. And yet, when I have something unique I want to create, like the cactus, it can't do it because it can't create. It just knows how to remix. So by the time I was done all this, it was cool to see my comic come to life, but it just seemed soulless. And I've noticed that's the case with a lot of this generative AI content. Now, conversely, I do want to say that I have seen some content that does it pretty good, namely a few Bigfoot vlog videos. There are a ton of them, and there's a lot of bad ones, but there are a few good ones, and I think that really goes to show when you can see a human is behind the scene, because it's just the way it's written. You can tell a human wrote it. And as I'm saying that, I do want to say there's the whole human exceptionalism argument, and it is possible that though it is now possible for me to watch something or read something and say a human was behind this or a human wasn't. That may not always be the case. AI may get to a point where we do consider the quality good and human level, and that again raises another whole can of worms that I could go into that I'll try not to talk about. But for now, where things are right now, I think you can tell most of the time if a human is behind something or not, and that does seem to make the difference. So, at the end of the day, like I said, the reason why I viewed things optimistically was because I love creating, and when I see these tools come out, I see these tools as something that can enhance my creative abilities. You know, this RTS idea that I had, like without a gigantic team, is not a very feasible idea for an indie dev. Even with AI, it's a very ambitious idea. That's why I'm not committing to it right now. I'm just saying it's an idea that I have. But nonetheless, I'm looking at AI, I'm looking at these technologies, and I'm thinking, how can I utilize this technology to create what I want to create? And I believe AI can do this for all of us. It can lift up all of our creative abilities, allow us to work on bigger and better, more ambitious projects like my RTS idea. But I also know that people have a tendency to follow the path of least resistance. And particularly, this is an issue when it comes to the companies who produce the music we listen to, the TV shows and movies that we watch, and the video games that we play. Because I have a fear that for every intentional, creative, unique use of AI that we have, it may be drowned out by a flood of mindless and soulless content. And that's not even to speak of pure human content. You know, imagine if Studio Ghibli, like we just shifted its timeline of existence and started it, 5-10 years from today when we're just fully deep into this AI age. Would that content stand out at all? When we look at Steam, so in game dev, there's this kind of problem that everybody mentions that each year pretty much doubles the last year in the amount of games that are released. So if you look at 2015 and you look at 2025, there's like 10 times as many games released in 2025 as 2015. That number is probably like way off, but the drastic difference is the point. But what isn't so commonly mentioned, although people do mention it, is that, the bottom 90% of that content is very, very low quality games. And the good games usually rise to the top. And that's always been the case. Sometimes it takes a while, like we saw with Among Us back in 2020. That game had been kind of underground, just nobody knew of it until the right circumstances with the pandemic popped off and it became a hit. But usually the good stuff rises to the top. So you're thinking, okay, well, in an age of AI slop, perhaps, something good human-made will still rise to the top too. And I hope that's the case. The thing that we have to be careful of, though, is that AI is getting better and better, and even assuming that it can't eventually do things as well as we can, which it probably can, it doesn't need to, right? Because think about doom scrolling, social media versus reading, TikTok versus watching a movie. There are, we know these other things are higher quality than what we're consuming on our phone. But these things have been engineered in a way that kind of hacks our dopamine in our brain. And even though it's lower quality, we put our attention into these apps. And that's what I'm afraid AI might do. That terrible games may beat out good games just because AI knows the right buttons to press in a human's brain, metaphorically speaking. I really hope that's not a literal thing that happens. It's just not good. There's a good way we can go about using generative AI, creating generative AI, creating content with it. And as of right now, I don't know how good it's looking. So when it comes to game dev, I think that it'll be a while before this kind of technology is any kind of threat, but likely not that long of a time either. I don't know how the industry is going to play out. This is such a turbulent time, but all I know is that for me, I'll be creating regardless. I just love creating. It was my dream as a kid to be a game developer, and I'm just going to keep creating. That's all I can do, really. As for my thoughts on this RTS game, That's something I really need to think about because, like I've explained in this video, my thoughts have kind of shifted a bit, and I need to figure out for myself what I consider to be valid use of AI to achieve my goal and what isn't, It's a lot to think about, and I'm just kind of at a place right now where I'm truly starting to think about this in a way that I hadn't before. And perhaps it would have been better to save this video until I've gone through that process fully, but I think it's better to talk about it now. I'd particularly like to hear your views in particular regarding this, because I do want to make this game, but I am now having moral kind of dilemmas with the technology I'd need to use to make this game possible. So anyway, this is a bit of a rant. My content is normally more structured, but I thought a more stream of consciousness style video would be good. It's also less work for me to do, which I don't have as much time as I used to when I was making my videos in the past, and hopefully I'll get back to making more videos like that in the future, but for the time being, I may have to stick with videos like this. So if you enjoyed this at all, please like, comment, subscribe, and thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.